you may remember that back in 2021, Tucker Carlson went on the air with a rather extraordinary story, a rather extraordinary claim, which was that the NSA, that is designed not to spy on American citizens, but to spy on foreign adversaries, was in fact spying on his communications. And this is what Tucker went on the air and said. We have that clip. We're going to pull it up in just a second. Here it is.
But it's not just political protesters the government is spying on. Yesterday, we heard from a whistleblower within the U.S. government who reached out to warn us that the NSA, the National Security Agency, is monitoring our electronic communications and is planning to leak them in an attempt to take this show off the air. Now, that's a shocking claim, and ordinarily we'd be skeptical of it. It's illegal for the NSA to spy on American citizens. It's a crime. It's not a third world country. Things like that should not happen in America. But unfortunately, they do happen, and in this case, they did happen. The whistleblower, who is in a position to know, repeated back to us information about a story that we are working on that could have only come directly from my texts and emails. There's no other possible source for that information, period. The NSA captured that information without our knowledge and did it for political reasons. The Biden administration is spying on us. We have confirmed that.
All right, that's a pretty extraordinary claim. I don't think Tucker Carlson is a person prone to just going and inventing stories. He's been in the media for decades. No one ever has claimed that that's something he's done before. Obviously, he's criticized for all sorts of other things, but he's worked in every media outlet across the spectrum and has never been caught, never been accused of simply fabricating. And yet that's what he claimed, was that he proved that the NSA was spying on him. Now, obviously, the people in the media who have no audience but who specialize in essentially covering Fox News decided that that was a joke, it was preposterous, the NSA would never do such a thing, and the people who serve the U.S. security state decided to mock it. Here you see the employee for CNN named Oliver Darcy, never has broken a story in his life, but is obsessed with Fox News, had an article right immediately after in June of 2021 entitled "Tucker Carlson Claimed the NSA is Spying on Him, Even His Own Colleagues Don't Seem to Believe It." And the obvious purpose of this was to mock him. Same with this Vox headline from July 1st. Tucker Carlson's NSA spying claims are evidence-free. Republicans are running with them anyway. That was by Aaron Rupert, who is the Vox video dunce, the person who does nothing but watches Fox all day and posts distorted clips to the internet to serve the Democratic Party. He was at Vox then, which is where he earned the name Vox video dunce. He knows nothing about anything, but he decided that this was a false story. The NSA would never do such a thing. Except then what happened is something very odd, which is Axios, a part of the corporate media, on July 7th, published a story that seemed to confirm at least parts of it. Namely, you see their scoop. Tucker Carlson sought Putin interview at the time of spying claim. This is by Jonathan Swan, who I regard as one of the better journalists in corporate media. Liberals love him because he conducted an adversarial, but I thought fair interview of Donald Trump, and generally does a decent job reporting. He reported on July 7th of 2021 that somehow people inside the government knew exactly what Tucker Carlson was doing at the time that he claimed that he was being spied on. Namely, he was trying to get an interview with Vladimir Putin, something that all journalists should have been doing. And that obviously gave some credence to the story, and we never really got anywhere else after that. What that article actually said was that there was a, quote, US-based Kremlin intermediary that Tucker was using to try and get that interview with Putin. So somehow the NSA had a lot of details, or the US government had a lot of details about those conversations, enough to leak Axios what it was exactly that he was doing. That seemed to lend credence to his claim that he had been spied upon by his own government. But it never went anywhere because the media just decided that they had no interest in it and they didn't care. And they decided to mock it instead, and Tucker basically stopped talking about it. Yesterday, though, the left-wing journalist, Anya Parampil, who has done some of the best reporting on foreign policy in particular, typically associated with the left, she works at Gray Zone, published an article that was designed to say that she, in fact, has confirmed or can confirm or provide proof that Tucker Carlson, in fact, was spied upon by the NSA. In fact, she self-identified as, quote, the US-based Kremlin intermediary that tried to help Tucker Carlson book an interview with Putin. In other words, that the axios story was true, that she, in fact, was talking to Tucker Carlson about the possibility of interviewing Vladimir Putin. And the fact that axios knew that certainly strongly suggests that indeed what Tucker Carlson claimed is true. Here's what her story said, quote, whether such tactics will succeed in undermining Carlson and Trump's relationship, you know what, I'm going to leave that to when I talk to her, which I'm about to do in a minute. I find it very notable, though, that she has come forward, given, again, that she is typically associated with the left, to offer definitive proof of the story. We're about to talk to her about what exactly evidence she's in possession of and how she's able to offer it, and a few other questions as well. Like I said, I find her one of the more interesting voices when it comes to foreign policy. She reports for The Gray Zone, which is extremely independent, and we are delighted to have her for her debut appearance here on System Update. We're about to talk to her right now for our interview segment. Anya, good evening. It's great to see you. How are you?
Hello. I'm great. How are you?
Good. I'm happy that you're here for your debut appearance, which I hope won't be your last. You have an extremely interesting story that I want to talk to you about, as well as a couple other things. You published in Gray Zone an article in which you essentially said that you're able to prove or offer evidence that Tucker Carlson, in fact, was spied upon by the NSA during this period. What is that evidence that you have, and how does it constitute proof of the veracity of his claims?
Thanks again for having me, Glenn. Basically, what I explain in this story, published at the Gray Zone, is a timeline that stretches between the end of April and early July 2021. People may recall, as you covered just now, that on I think it was June 28th, Tucker Carlson went public with this story claiming that the Biden administration was spying on him, had actually accessed his private messages, texts and emails, in order to leak those messages to the press, and that he found out about this because an NSA whistleblower had actually come forward and informed him of the plot. And the reason he believed this person was telling the truth is that they actually met with him in person and repeated back to him information that someone would only know if they had access to Tucker's private messages. And he said at the time that this was all regarding a story he was working on, but he didn't specify the details of the story. Now, just a few weeks ago or a few days ago, Tucker did finally talk about this publicly, give some more information regarding what actually happened. He told the Full Send podcast that this all had to do with his plan to travel to Russia in the summer of 2021, which is really just months before the latest escalation in this war happened, when Russia launched its military escalation in Ukraine in February of 2022. So just a few months before then, this was after Biden had already taken office, Tucker was planning to go to Russia. He wanted to interview Russian President Vladimir Putin. And this is, according to Tucker, what he said in the Full Send podcast, what the NSA and the U.S. government were spying on. And these messages were what they wanted to leak to the press. Now, because this whistleblower came forward and actually warned Tucker, he was able to get ahead of them, go public on his show. And even though he didn't get any support in the media, and virtually no journalist asked questions about what Tucker was alleging and just took the word of the U.S. government, as you then pointed out, Axios reported a story in which they appeared to actually prove what Tucker was saying was true, because they had quoted U.S. officials saying that Tucker was trying to book this interview with Putin around the same time that he made the allegations that the NSA was spying on his communications. So how do I fit into the picture? I was actually kind of getting a front row seat. I was privy to all of what was going on at the time, because Tucker had told me at the end of April 2021 that he was trying to go interview Putin, but he was having difficulties book the interview. And because I had a rapport with Tucker, I trusted him, and I also happened to have a really good contact in the Russian government. I tried to help him by putting him in touch with that contact and just assuming that Tucker's team would take it from there and perhaps they'd be able to schedule this interview. And this contact, it was the deputy foreign minister. His name is Sergei Ryabkov. He's the second most powerful diplomat in Russia. And I met him in the summer of 2019 when I was in Caracas, Venezuela, on behalf of the Gray Zone, covering a meeting of the non-aligned movement. Basically, there were the Iranian foreign minister was there, the Bolivian foreign minister was there, all of these high-level diplomats, including Ryabkov, were there, and I interviewed many of them. And one of them I interviewed was him, and he's a very powerful, very important figure in the world. He has negotiated some of the main treaties established between the United States and Russia.
He's somebody any real journalist would want to talk to.
Exactly. He actually was spearheading the peace negotiations over Ukraine on behalf of the Russian government. So he was someone, I interviewed him, and I maintained contact with him. Sometimes I would send him an article and say, what do you think about this? Or I heard that there was this story about Ukraine negotiations, and I should just disclose the fact that my main interest here is that I actually would like peace between Russia and the United States, because I am from the United States and I don't want there to be a nuclear war. And I think it would be in the United States' interest to just have a reasonable relationship with Russia. Anyway, I put them in touch, and apparently that was when the NSA began intercepting Tucker's messages, because I didn't think much of it at the time, but when I put them in touch on an email thread, they both replied, and applied within hours, within 12 hours. Both of them wrote back to me and to each other. But then a few days later, Ryabkov wrote me back and said that for some reason his email to Tucker would not send. And I thought it had to do with maybe spam, or because, it was a Russian government email. There was something that bounced back. Tucker had a different email service than I did. And I forwarded the messages. I think sometimes I texted Tucker. I asked him, did you get this message? And turned out, no, Tucker didn't get any of the emails. Ryabkov's email address was sending him, even though I knew that they were both accurate in the thread, because they had already both replied to the email. So I didn't make a mistake. In retrospect, then, a few weeks later, when Tucker told me that this NSA source had come forward and told him that the U.S. government was spying on his communications, then it kind of clicked. Oh, there was some interference going on there. And at the time when this was all going on, this was when Tucker came forward in June 2021. He didn't offer specifics of the story. I was kind of just so blown away by everything that there was no reason for me to assert myself in the situation and corroborate his story or vouch for him. And then a few weeks later, in early July 2021, then Axios did this story where they confirmed what he said and claimed, based on the quotes from U.S. officials, that Tucker was dealing with U.S.-based Kremlin intermediaries in order to get an interview with Putin at the time he made these allegations. And so when that story came out, Tucker and I were talking, and it was very clear. That means they were saying I was the Kremlin-based. I mean, they said Kremlin-based intermediaries. They used the plural. I would love for the U.S. government to offer specifics as to who they were talking about there and if there were multiple people, but I can pretty much say for certain, based on my experience, that they were referring to at least me, and I don't know if they're referring to anyone else. And so again, I didn't talk about the story then. Tucker didn't offer details, but then when I saw him come out and say, yes, this was happening when I was trying to interview Putin, I was like, all right, now we might as well tell the full story, and I can tell the full story. So I just went ahead and put it all down.
You know, I remember at the time, obviously the NSA happens to be an interest of mine, that the agency put out a statement, knowing how stupid most journalists are, that pretended to deny the story but actually denied nothing. They said, this is preposterous. We can confirm that Mr. Carlson has never been a target of ours. And everyone knows, who knows anything about the NSA, that when the NSA says they're not a target, you're not a target of theirs, it doesn't mean they're not eavesdropping on your conversations. All they have to do is proclaim the people with whom you are speaking to be their targets. And then they're free to listen in on your conversation, even though you're an American citizen, without warrants, because they're just claiming, we're not targeting Tucker, we're not targeting this other American citizen, we're targeting these foreign nationals with whom they happen to be speaking. That was the whole point of the Bush-Cheney spying program that got revealed by the New York Times in 2005 that won a Pulitzer. The law that was passed in 2008 that's now up for renewal was designed to retroactively legalize that, to give the government the power to spy without warrants on the conversations of Americans by claiming they're just targeting foreign nationals. And of course, the Biden administration is demanding it get renewed again. And there's a lot of Republicans who want Biden to have that power, because the bipartisan consensus in Washington is that we should be able to spy on our citizens without warrants. But what struck me was how stupid journalists were to believe that this NSA denial actually was a denial, and that's what caused them to go mock Tucker. Oh, the NSA denies it. It's amazing that journalists take a denial anyway from the NSA and assume it's true without skepticism. But in this case, it wasn't a denial. And that's what was so obvious to me was, well, they're obviously spying on someone with whom Tucker is speaking. I assumed that meant they were spying on the Russian diplomats with whom he was speaking to set up an interview with Putin, until the Axios story came out and made clear that, in fact, he was talking to a United States citizen who they had proclaimed to be a Kremlin intermediary. Now, just for people who don't know the rules of the NSA. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.